For the first few hours of Avowed, there's this gnawing feeling that it's all rather old-fashioned. Not necessarily in terms of its look, although the character animations and environments have a distinct 7th gen stiffness. It's more the ambition of the game itself. It doesn't seem to be doing anything grand or headline grabbing. This is a big, new role-playing adventure from a renowned first-party studio, but I just seem to be running around whacking lizard people. Where are the bold new ideas? In truth, I felt like I was playing an Xbox 360 game, albeit one with ray tracing and DLSS 3. But stick with it, and that cynicism melts away. Its Xbox 360-ness starts to feel like a strength, actually. Unlike so many po-faced RPGs of today, Avowed feels blissfully unburdened by complexity. It's an adventure in the warm sea air of a strange and fantastical island, and it never loses sight of that, of being an adventure. It's a game about climbing around on treasure hunts, striking out into the unknown, and reveling in the absurdity of its superpowered combat. It's a game that enjoys being a game, and I don't think we say that enough. Avowed is an action role-playing game in the same way Skyrim is an action role-playing game. A first-person swashbuckling spell lobber where you run around picking up carrots and cheese wedges, but there the similarities stop. This isn't a sandbox, but rather a more authored kind of game where characters and their associated stories are deliberately placed to direct you around the world. It's also an experience where the few companions you meet aren't optional and aren't romanceable, which feels delightfully novel these days. They'll fight alongside you in battle, 2 at a time, and weigh in on decisions you make both in the moment and when you're back at camp. The adventure itself takes place in an island region called the Living Lands, a mysterious continent in the world of Eora, the setting of Obsidian's acclaimed Pillars of Eternity games. It's a standalone affair, so you don't need to have played those games to understand this one, but there's an undeniable thrill for returning players in seeing this previously isometric universe through the eyes of a person who lives there. There are also several nods to characters and events from previous Pillars games, and it's nice to be back. Whether you know the world or not though, one thing is inescapable. This setting is a very pleasant place to be. Warm sun, clear water bays, busy jetties and ramshackle towns. This is a tropical getaway. But it's a getaway with a problem. A plague of sorts, a fungi-powered exuberance twisting the trees and making everything kaleidoscopically colourful. There's no subtlety here then, no moody realism. This is maximalist fantasy, and I am absolutely here for it. It's beautiful. And it's into this setup you arrive as an envoy of an overseas emperor to find out what's going on and stop it. You're also a godlike, a chosen one of a deity who left its mark upon you at birth, a gaudy facial feature chosen during character creation. The only problem is, you don't know who your god is. But as you arrive on the island, a voice starts to sound in your head. It's an intriguing setup, but it takes a while for that intrigue to properly emerge from the barrage of exposition in the first few hours. There's an obsessive focus on info dumping the world state, its various factions and players, and where they stand. It's like having a chessboard described to you in meticulous detail. The genericness of running around a town collecting quests from exclamation mark denoted NPCs and bounties from a notice board also does nothing to alleviate this. In the opening few hours, Avowed feels distinctly uninspired. But the game is saved early on and propelled for many hours after by its very Moorish combat, which, funnily enough, was an area of concern in trailers prior to release. As a spectator, Avowed's fights don't look particularly special and the enemies seem hesitant almost, but it's less about what they do to you that matters and more about what you do to them. In short, sending them flying. It's the way enemies ragdoll with the velocity of your gunshots, axe blows or explosive spells when they die that makes it so enjoyable. Combat is all about movement, dodging and dashing, and there's a snap and responsiveness immediately apparent when fighting that makes it satisfying to do. The free-form approach to combat is also one of the game's major draws, and it's fun to toy around with. There are skill trees associated with ranger, fighter and wizard archetypes, but you're free to mix and match abilities from whichever build you want. It's perfectly feasible to be an armoured mage, for example, example, and switch between wand and spellbook and two-handed hammer. I was a hybrid fighter ranger broadly, but because respeccing can be done at any time for a small fee, I changed around a lot within that idea. At times more like a heavily armoured fighter, at others a nimble archer. My favourite build involved starting with power shots from my rifle, or arquebus in the parlance of the game, and charging into melee with my axe. There are some wonderful abilities to go with this too, such as spinning attacks, that aforementioned charge, and a rapid flurry of blows. At the heart of your build is your equipment, which determines alongside your level what you're capable of in the game. Equipment is separated into tiers with 3 upgradable steps in between them, and if you fight enemies considered a higher tier than you, you'll incur significant penalties to damaging them, whereas they'll gain significant bonuses in damaging you. It's therefore a bad idea not to engage with the crafting and upgrade system. You'll know if your gear isn't good enough, incidentally, because your companions will incessantly nag you to upgrade it. Each major area of the game is based around an equipment tier, so the repeated loop becomes struggle for a bit in a new area, then gradually gather enough resources or new items to become an all-powerful hard who can batter everyone, before moving on to the next area and finding yourself once again at the bottom of the mountain, staring up. It's a nice system. You can upgrade pieces of equipment and use them all the way through the game if you want, though you will constantly be finding unique gear that challenges your loyalty to them. This gear tier idea does a good job of managing the pace and encouraging you to explore the entirety of a region to get the most from it, though you can break this rhythm if you don't mind taking on significant challenges. This cyclical rhythm of stripping a new region to its bones does start to wear thin by the time you reach the 3rd or 4th area, but the charm of Avowed lies in the way Obsidian finds to alleviate this. It's here where the playfulness of the studio really comes to the fore. Each of its zones are more like oversized playgrounds than sandboxes, filled as they are with jumping puzzles and unexplored caves and hidden treasures. It's rare to go anywhere in the world and not feel rewarded for it, be it by one of the many chests squirreled away, emitting a faint tinkling sound when you're near, or by the dramatic climbs that await you, leading to spectacular scenery, or the bizarre pockets of story you'll find. Everywhere you go, something has been hand-placed to entertain you. In the early stages of the game, I was waiting for this Obsidian-ness to shine through, this wit, this imagination, because this is a studio renowned for making RPGs with that kind of character. Thankfully, like water cracking and eventually rupturing a dam, it absolutely comes through. Even when swamping you in mechanically uninteresting tasks and pages of conversation, it's able to raise a smile or to dangle RPG tropes in front of you before deftly subverting them, toying with your expectations as a player, and one assumes, statistically some of you, your expectations as a fan of the studio. And being Obsidian, there's a lot of weighty choice and consequence stuff here, with significant events written into each act that carry huge stakes for the story and the people you meet. There's never a correct outcome, never a general consensus. Always someone will disagree and then confront you about it, pushing you to explain, to reflect, to justify. There's always a conversation to be had. There's so much more to the companions than I thought there would be. And there are some really touching, tender moments where they reveal hidden sides of themselves and ask for advice. However, it doesn't always come together. There are moments where systems and story jar with each other. Food plays a key mechanical role in the game by healing or buffing for you, obviously, for example. So you'll often be carrying pies and ales and a larder's worth of grub with you, but in the second area of the game, which is suffering from a really horrific famine, you never offer any of it to anyone, and it feels odd to be standing there making concerned faces at someone who's telling you how their family are starving while you're cutting about with a sort of Death Stranding stack of 75 fish pies. It's not just incidental things either. There are major decisions towards the end of the game for which the ramifications start to raise their head before disappearing a moment later, as though everything is suddenly forgotten. I'm still scratching my head about the missing consequences of one of my biggest end-of-game decisions. Clearly a lot of your actions and decisions are tracked, but some never seem to amount to anything and blow away on the breeze. It leads to a feeling that much of Avowed's story is fixed and you're merely choosing the context in which key events happen, rather than their actual outcomes. You can feel the limitations Obsidian was working with, the places where a modest budget couldn't quite stretch to match an ideal, despite some heroic effort. This isn't the AAA Microsoft-funded showcase I once believed it would be. It's closer in spirit perhaps to the AA or even B-tier games that had their heyday in the Xbox 360 era, which I promise you isn't meant to disparage. Rather, it's to invoke the spirit of that age and how many of those games overcame their limitations to become beloved classics, with a clarity of vision and a sense of fun that resonated with audiences. Avowed has been more generous than I thought it would be in length, in heart, in depth, and it never loses sight of being a game, of being an adventure, of taking you to places you would normally never go, or of simply providing a few dozen hours of unabashed escapism. I think it's one of this year's most pleasant surprises. Although not to me, because I previewed it last year and I tell you it was a banger.